Hello, I'm the Sexual Abuse Awareness and Response Trainer at the ARC. In this video, we'll briefly cover what is involved with supporting youth with IDD transitioning into adulthood in regard to relationships, sex, and potential abuse awareness and response. This can be a heavy topic for viewers, so we will focus on what can be done to promote autonomy for an individual with IDD and to educate about healthy relationships. This individual can then be empowered to identify unhealthy relationships and take necessary steps towards change. We will start by reviewing the prevalence of harm folks with IDD experience in order to understand why information about consent, sex, and anatomy are important protective factors against sexual abuse. There will be resources and tools included for you to explore accompanying this video so that you can continue to get the support you need. As we discuss these subjects, it's okay and expected to have emotions like fear and overwhelming concern. While you take in this information, please do what you need to take care of yourself, like pausing the playback or taking a break so that we can continue to be present to learn. It's important to acknowledge that there are varying levels of understanding, as well as thoughts as to how best to support someone living with IDD. As I shared, there is a valid fear that you may have about your kids in transition to adulthood, embarking on a new chapter of life, which includes relationships. Teaching them about what healthy relationships looks like, as well as about harm that can occur, can seem daunting. It's important to recognize that while the challenge may seem insurmountable, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. That intentional time and effort you put into those conversations slowly but surely begin to take hold over time, and your kids become better prepared for adulthood. It's often the case that we spend a lot of time teaching folks about the daily tasks that life requires, like toileting or going to the bathroom, but often spend little time discussing their bodies, that they have control over who touches their bodies, or even accurate names for body parts. To help understand why these are important life lessons for everyone, I'll go over how lack of this understanding can lead to greater risk of harm. I'll share important community-based supports and resources should harm occur. Next, I'll share the role of consent in healthy or unhealthy relationships and how acknowledging their ability to take risks ultimately helps to preserve their dignity and helps empower them to make good choices. So why, you may ask, are we discussing healthy relationships and abuse awareness in a Life After High School training? Well, here are some startling statistics that emphasize the importance of this conversation. People with disabilities are nearly 4 times more likely than others to be victims of violent crime. Folks with IDD are up to 7 times greater risk of sexual violence than others. Of the entire US population, it is estimated that 1 in 5 females are sexually abused during their lifetimes. However, over 3 out of 5 females with IDD will experience sexual abuse before they are 18 years old. It may or may not surprise you to know that people who abuse those with IDD are more often someone who's known to them. This includes acquaintances like paid staff or family friends, intimate partners, and relatives. There are also a number of contributing factors that place folks with IDD at higher risk of sexual abuse, such as constant messaging that individuals with IDD need to be compliant with those around them, lack of knowledge about sexual acts or even their own bodies, and not being seen as capable of sex or relationships. It's often the case that intense feelings of fear or concern for safety can stop us from having an open and honest discussion about sex and relationships with people with IDD. However, it is a fact that not doing so often puts folks with IDD more at risk of experiencing harm by not knowing the realities of their bodies, sexuality, or what's healthy in a relationship. To that end, let's discuss what is helpful to talk about in an effort to stop violence from occurring in the first place. Besides knowing the real names of the parts of their bodies, understanding different types of relationships can be key in differentiating people's roles in their life. For example, there should be a clear distinction between familial, chosen, and professional relationships. People who are paid to provide care or support are sometimes referred to as friends or family by those they care for. This is not helpful, as it gives the impression that both individuals have mutual choice in spending time with one another, instead of what really is happening, which is a service or support is being provided. This is important for individuals to know that someone who is paid to be with them is different from someone who chooses to willingly spend time together. Folks should be encouraged to seek meaningful relationships outside of those who are paid to be with them. This helps reduce isolation, as well as clarify that those who are in professional relationships are restricted from engaging in sexual behavior with the individual under the law. Another key understanding of healthy relationships is the presence of trust, respect, and choice. Both individuals in any relationship, whether it be family, friends, intimate partners, or professionals, should honor one another by demonstrating trustworthiness, respect for one another, and allow for individuals' ability to choose. When someone has demonstrated they cannot be trusted, when someone doesn't show that they can respect the other by their actions, and when someone is bossed around or not given a choice to say no, this relationship should be regarded as unhealthy. The last component of this conversation is consent. Consent has a legal definition under Washington state law, but also can be generalized to mean permission to do something. While most often used to discuss permission to sexual activity, consent can be applied to almost any activity, like choosing to allow someone to touch you or asking for consent to touch someone else. Consent is based on individual choice. Each participant should vocalize their express consent before any contact takes place. Just because someone doesn't say no does not mean that they consent to an action. This is sometimes stated as consent is an emphatic yes, not the absence of a no. Consent is also active, meaning it can be revoked for any reason at any time. Someone can change their minds in the middle of an activity. Constant asking how someone is doing or feeling is necessary for both individuals to ensure that people feel comfortable expressing themselves if they no longer want the action or activity to continue. Consent is not a one-time question. Just because someone has agreed to contact in the past does not mean they agree to it indefinitely. Consent for sex, as we alluded to earlier, cannot be given if the other party is family or a professional relationship. This is important to discuss. As I've mentioned, sexual abuse often happens by someone in these kinds of relationships. People who harm often use these kind of provider-based relationships to make the person with IDD feel that they need to comply or they will not get the care or attention that they need. By explaining that this activity is not okay and also not their fault, and that someone can say no or tell another adult what happened, this empowers someone to try to stop ongoing harm from occurring. Lastly, in regards to consent, is that consent needs to be freely given, meaning that someone doesn't say yes merely because they're afraid to say no. Whether someone in a chosen relationship, like friendship or dating relationship, sometimes people can assume that they need to comply with what the other person wants because of the nature of that relationship. This is also not true, and folks should be encouraged to say no, as well as to set boundaries. Setting boundaries is what we can refer to as telling other people your personal rules or how you want to be treated. We can then explain that if the other person continues to cross our boundaries after we've told them what our boundaries are, then we should consider no longer remaining friends or intimate partners. When discussing healthy relationships, it's important to remain supportive of folks' ability to make their own choices when it comes to people they choose to include in their lives. It can be difficult to hear of harm occurring, but if we fail to remain non-judgmental of their choices, we can harm their self-confidence. Self-confidence is a key ingredient to someone's ability to set boundaries and speak up against abuse. Remaining a support person who's not judgmental also allows for emotional safety, so that you may be someone that the individual goes to for help or guidance when things go wrong. You may want to check in with someone if you notice these following indicators of abuse. that there are changes in their routine, that they have untypical emotions or untypical behavior, they become more reserved or avoid conversation, or that they are hypervigilant or more fearful of their surroundings. If they have increased irritability or decreased interests in hobbies or activities, they start to engage in self-harm or increasingly risky behavior. They start to blame themselves for things they didn't cause. Any of these could be a sign that abuse has occurred, but these indicators could also be present even if abuse hasn't occurred. It's important to know the individual and their baseline behavior and stay objective to avoid jumping to conclusions. Recognizing a change and then checking in with the individual to open up a conversation is helpful when abuse has occurred. On the other hand, forcing someone to tell you something they're keeping secret, even if it does happen to involve sexual abuse, can be harmful. Forcing someone to disclose sexual abuse can be psychologically damaging. It can remind someone of the lack of control they experienced during the abuse and become a re-traumatizing experience. The key to support is to offer services to the person who is harmed, like a community-based program. Each community has a crime victim advocacy organization in Washington, or CSAP, Community-Based Sexual Assault Program, or offering adult protective services to report abuse themselves are both options for them to heal from harm. If or when someone is ready, they will talk about what's happened. By now, I'm sure you're feeling that this is a lot to take in, and I want to acknowledge that there are a great many nuances of this discussion. I encourage you to reach out to those in your community if you have questions, concerns, or want to learn more about the options available for consideration. Provided with this section are online resources and tools to help guide important conversation with your loved ones in their transitions from childhood to adulthood. You also have the option to connect to the ARC for help in understanding your rights to access legal, medical, or other services. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And thank you for your partnership in working towards an inclusive, fulfilling quality of life for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.